Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our virtual series that we're putting on for Caribbean HIV Awareness Day. So, throughout the entire month of June, we will be interviewing a few advocates and a few different people in the community as it relates to different Caribbean islands as we celebrate Caribbean Awareness Day. And so, I'm super excited today to have Dr. Lorneka Joseph with me. Hi, Lorneka.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrea, for having me. I'm excited about today's series and the interview. So, thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. So today, this is going to be a part of our Queen Bee HIV prevention program. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Lorneka Joseph with us here today. She is an amazing person. But before we get started and getting into her story and her details and everything that she does and the wonderful work that she is going to share with us today, I want to give an acknowledgement to our funders, which is the Florida Department of Health, as well as AIDS Healthcare Foundation. They fund our Queen Bee HIV prevention program. And I also would like to give recognition to On Our Own Terms, which is a part of the Black Women's Health Imperative in Washington, D.C. We're part of their steering committee. And with the focus on women today, or women and girls, definitely want to highlight them. And then UN AIDS as well as PEPFAR, because as far as I know, they are doing work globally in addition to AHF, to do a lot of the work to help fight the cause and fight HIV. So I definitely want to acknowledge them. Just to give a little bit of information about Let's Be Hive, we are a nonprofit organization located here in Orlando, Florida, and our name is an acronym for Let's Be HIV Educated. And so it's our mission to provide innovative HIV and AIDS health education workshops and prevention programs, just as what we're doing today. And our main goal is to reduce HIV among populations who are disproportionately affected by this disease. And so, definitely outside of the United States, the Caribbean islands are definitely an area that's disproportionately affected. So this is why we're doing this presentation today. Our goal with Let's Be Hive is to increase awareness, reduce new transmissions, as well as improving therapeutic outcomes among people who are living with HIV. And our Queen Bee HIV prevention program is specific for women and girls, and we focus on prevention, awareness, and outreach services. And as you see here, we also do condom distribution, sister to sister classes, definitely social media awareness, and we have opportunities to partner with local businesses as well as faith based partners. So, today, we have our lovely guest speaker, and I'm going to just briefly read her bio before we get into her questions. Dr. Lorneka Joseph is a native of the Bahamas. She is an award-winning pharmacist. She graduated from Florida A&M University with her Doctor of Pharmacy degree, as well as a minor in journalism and communications. So she can definitely help me out in a lot of different areas. And I'm so excited to have her today because as a pharmacist myself, it's really good to have colleagues and, people who really understand the passion for, HIV awareness and education, and just the benefits of having pharmacists in this arena and this line of work is super exciting. So I'm so happy to have her here today.
Yes.
Dr. Lorneka, she's the founder of Brightly Awake Coaching and Consulting. And she has her own company. She has her own clientele, such as Hogan, Lovell's Law Firm, University of West Georgia, SLS Baha Mar Hotel, which is, oh my God.
Have you been there, Andrea?
No, but I am planning to go. So when I saw that in the bio, I said, oh my gosh, she is a powerhouse. She's also worked with the Florida Department of Health, Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and she's doing all of this work while also managing her 9 to 5, working as a pharmacist. And so that's another area where I feel like her and I can definitely relate because I'm managing my nonprofit organization while still working and practicing pharmacy. So
That's a lot. And kudos to you. Kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah. So anyone who is out there who's thinking, can you do this? Yes, you can. And we are both examples of women who can do both things. And so
Yes.
if that is any inspiration to anyone who's viewing or watching today. Um, she also is certified in HIV for testing and counseling. And so I'm super excited that she's also had the opportunity to test in places such as Haiti, the Bahamas, as well as Tallahassee. And so we'll get into some questions later as well for Dr. Joseph. Her contact information is listed below. So if anyone needs to reach out or contact Dr. Joseph, you can definitely email her at info@brightlyawake, or definitely contact her on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Dr. Lorneka. You'll definitely find her. So let's welcome Dr. Lorneka. How are you doing
Thank
today?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm doing good. I'm excited for the summertime, excited about this interview. And, as we were, speaking of earlier about, the different awareness, this is actually kind of new because most people, the last time, like I said, I've heard about Caribbean HIV awareness was when I was in high school. So I'm excited about, you being used to repivot and resurface this awareness on June 8th, outside of World AIDS Day, in December. So I'm excited about this conversation.
So tell us, I'm excited too. And it's different. It was hard for me, and I know I've been searching and looking for information online. Like, is
Mhm.
this still an awareness day? Because I know it previously was. So I've been in this line of work as far as HIV advocacy since about I used to be a tester and counselor, and I'm in the process of getting everything recertified. But this
Okay.
was back in like 2003,
Wow.
2004 that I was doing a lot of testing and counseling. That's when I first became an HIV advocate truly, but I feel like it wasn't until like the last 8 years that it really picked up and I really got
Mhm.
heavy back into it. And so
Okay.
I know previously we used to have and celebrate and recognize a national Caribbean American Awareness Day.
Yeah.
It was, but for some reason I couldn't find much of the information anymore. It's not listed on the CDC's website, the NIH website, as an official day to recognize, but
Yeah.
I felt like it was so important for us to still have this conversation, for us to still bring it back to the forefront.
Yeah.
And so, if you would, can you tell me about like your experience just growing up in the Bahamas and your journey to migrating to the United States?
Absolutely. So, oh my goodness. Usually my story is so unorthodox, Andrea, Dr. Andrea, because my story literally, I tell people my American dream started with $206, three suitcases, and a broken heart. That is literally how this all started. So I had just recently got out of a really, it wasn't a toxic relationship. It just was one of those, the relationships that we are in romantically, and it's like, it's not really going anywhere, but you're still stuck in it anyways. So that's what I was just coming out of. And then also, about 2 years prior, my mother had just passed away from MS. And for those who are not familiar with what that stands for, it's multiple sclerosis. And so we had just come back from Cuba. And so I was going through a lot at the time. I was emotionally, I would say, unavailable. And I really didn't know who I was prior to starting my American dream here in the US. And so I was one of those, I'm the eldest of two children. So my brother and I are 8 years apart. He still lives home in Nassau, and I frequently, I travel home a lot. And so basically, for me, moving to the US, for most immigrants, is really because we want an improved quality of life or a better quality of life. So the opportunities that we expect to be available, like, better education or affordable education. And still to this day, Dr. Andrea, is still something that is challenging for the average Bahamian. So we
Mm,
do have one main particular college. It is known as the University of the Bahamas. But unless you are really working 2 to 3 jobs, it is difficult for us to enroll in, say, for example, if you want to be a pharmacist or, nursing or things like that. It is just economically challenging, especially with minimum wage being less than $6 and gas is like $6 and change. So imagine,
Oh.
right? Yeah. I, and it is still that way, Andrea. When I was working as a pharmacy technician, growing up in Nassau and in New Providence, I remember being paid $5.65. And so when I speak to technicians today, or when I go back and whether it's a client or speaking engagement or just to spend time with family, it
Mhm.
is still mind boggling for me that that is the state of our country. And so when you raise the question, when you ask the question, what that was like, that is my beginning. That is my humble beginning. And that
Mhm.
was one of the main reasons why I moved to America. My biological father, he is a Haitian American. And so he opened the door. It was okay. I don't have a lot of money, but I can help you pursue what it is that your mother told me about that you were interested in, which was pharmacy.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a mouthful,
Yeah.
Dr. Lanika. Oh my gosh. Yes. And it's interesting too that your biological father is from Haiti, which is another Caribbean island that's also definitely one that we're going to talk about too later this month. So
Yes.
you even have even like the best of both worlds. I feel like, Bahamas is beautiful, and I
It
think a lot of
is.
times people just see the Caribbean islands and they just get so excited about the island itself, but not realizing all of the other things that are going on these islands and why people want to leave and maybe come to the United States, because I think you started at that university in the Bahamas and then
Yeah.
transferred over to
Yep.
Florida A&M.
Yeah, when I was there, it was formerly called the College of the Bahamas, and then I transferred to Miami-Dade, and then transferred to FAMU. And so, yeah, that's how my journey started. And literally, Dr. Andrea, and I believe in being completely honest and vulnerable. I was only able, I think I did maybe 2 semesters. Reason being, again, going back to the economic gap and
Mhm.
the in of the challenges with minimum wage and things like that. The reason why was because I only could afford 2 classes per semester. Back then, I don't know what it is right now. Back then, it was $300 a credit.
Oh
So
man.
my mother, again, she was ill. We didn't find out until we got to Cuba, and that's something that we'll talk about as well. But back then in the Bahamas, you went 2 places. Either you came to the US for advanced medical treatment or care, or back then you went to Cuba. And so my mother's best friend at the time, she had made us, privy to this information. And the flights were like $210, $215 from the Bahamas to Cuba. And the wellness, healthcare and the medical treatment in Cuba was very inexpensive. And so
Mm.
that's where we ended up. And that's where we found out that my mother was in stage 3 of MS. So, of course,
Wow.
at 17 years old, I was not only heartbroken, but I was devastated because I figured for myself, my country, and again, as you brought up, most people, when they see the Bahamas, our Ministry of Tourism slogan literally is, it's better in the Bahamas. But it's not better for locals, right? Not everyone. Like, it's still a struggle. Like, Americans or people who travel the world, they go there, spend time on the beach, go to places like Baha Mar Hotel. But when you get into the inner cities and when you get to the high schools, people are struggling, that people are there who they didn't eat yesterday.
Mm.
It's difficult. You're having to choose between paying your water bill and going to the local pharmacy to pick up your antihypertensive medication. That is what is going on and has been going on. And so that's just the basis of why I jumped on board when when my father said, listen, I don't have all the money, I don't have all the resources, but I can help you change your immigration status, your naturalization status, and you can go to school and see if you can make a life for yourself. And here I am 16 and a half years later.
Such a blessing. Oh my gosh. Yes. And thank you for your transparency too, and just sharing, that part of your story, because just listening, I can only imagine how hard that is, and then you
Mhm.
think of $206, especially with gas and everything that we see now, even though that was a long time ago, even then
Yeah,
a long time ago, it wasn't a
it
lot of
wasn't.
money, so that's such a blessing, to see that you still made it. And so that is definitely more encouragement to give people who think that, you know, you can't fulfill these dreams because of financial or economic struggles. And that's not necessarily the
Yeah,
case. It's just a matter of having that support system in place. So thank you so much for that.
my pleasure.
So what was your very first introduction into HIV and just learning about it, what it was? How did you learn about it?
So I'm going to share two aspects. So I guess we can say informally and formally. So I was first made aware, Dr. Andrea, of HIV in my community. So my mother, God rest her soul, she's transitioned on to be with the Lord. I remember her sharing with my mother was very vulnerable, which is also the basis of why Brightly Awake started. Because I believe that not only are we to talk about, what's going on in our communities and in our families, but also shedding light on these taboo topics such as HIV. So I first became aware of HIV through someone that my mother was dating at the time prior to getting married to my bonus father. And what I remember, Dr. Andrea, was I noticed that, walking from school, because, the island is very small. So, yeah, we do have cars, but really you can walk most places, if you're in close proximity. And what I remember was his weight changing. And I think I was about 13 or 14. I remember saying to my mommy, and I was like, Mommy, what's going on with him? Like, so and so, he seems pretty small. Is he sick or something like that? And that's when actually my mother sat me down. So sex education, I know we're going to get into that, but my first introduction to sex education, Dr. Andrea, was my mother in
Mm,
in our living room. So we didn't have the internet back then. Of course, we're probably dating ourselves, so we didn't have the internet, computers, or cell phones back then, in my home. But my mother was the one that first introduced me to sex. And so
mm,
she, kind of explained, was like, well, what happened to him was this particular guy, he was diagnosed with HIV and it progressed to AIDS. Like literally, his weight had dramatically decreased.
mm,
And so, what, for us, in the medical space, he went from being healthy to, dealing with drugs and things like that. And that was my first introduction to HIV. But then learning it from a medical, expert. And that's when I started, when I got to FAMU, the illustrious Florida A&M University, when I got there to pursue my PharmD, that's when I really was like, okay, I spoke with one of my professors. He was a former dean, at FAMU, Dr. Michael Thompson, one of, I consider, the best HIV/AIDS educators. And I went to him and I was like, I'm really interested in learning about this. And I think for me, what really stuck with me and made me really so passionate about it, Dr. Andrea, was because HIV/AIDS patients, right? That community is so outcasted and underestimated and forgotten. I was like, I'm going to do something. And so that's when
mm.
I joined organization. I became certified on the SHISA in Tallahassee, Florida. And that was my introduction to the HIV/AIDS awareness community and even just everything about it, from medications to the neglect to the even what, people like advocates like Magic Johnson has been doing all these years.
Yeah, that is amazing. Even with two, like I know for me, one of my passions was um just knowing that there was treatment out there to actually help. And then now with what we know is U equals U, I
Right.
felt like we knew that there was some form of U equals U when we were able to prevent perinatal transmission through
Yeah.
medication, right? So I feel
Right.
like it took all of these years now,
Right.
all of these years later for, the CDC and to actually acknowledge that U equals U is a real
It's real.
thing,
Yeah.
which U means undetectable equals
I'm trans-
untransmittable. But I get so excited in this area as a pharmacist just because it's because of the treatments, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's such like there's a disconnect between the lack of knowledge and what the general public knows,
Mm-hmm.
seeing people newly diagnosed with this disease and then not knowing what to do, being afraid of the medications. And I know that this is a very particular area that I feel like we kind of get into when you look into the Caribbeans and the different islands and different
Yeah.
cultural beliefs and natural remedies. And so, with our mission, using natural medicine,
Yeah.
um, using health education as natural medicine to
Mm-hmm.
eradicate HIV and AIDS is like one of our mottos here, and that, you know, early detection and testing, treatment, all of those things can help save lives, but HIV education can too. And that was
Exactly.
one of the things that I felt like, we sit in these conferences, we're sitting in the classrooms. I mean, because that's when we really got detailed into like the pathophysiology treatment and
Right.
everything like that. But I felt like this is stuff that the general public have
Does
no idea.
not
Maybe not the
know.
depth of what we know, but just the basics, there was a huge gap. And that was why, like for me, with starting Let's Beehive, I wanted to focus on just educating people.
Education.
Just
Yeah.
education. So we definitely have those similar passions, especially with the treatments. But what is it specifically that you feel like the Bahamian community needs to know, either here in the United States
Mm-hmm.
as well as back home, because HIV is prevalent amongst both of these communities. So I'm going
Yeah.
to go ahead and move on because the Caribbean Awareness Day, like I mentioned before, it was previously listed as an awareness day, but we don't really see it as much anymore. But I wanted to still take the time to recognize it. But normally it used to be held on June 8th of every year, excuse
Uh-huh.
me. And the whole idea was to draw attention to HIV, the epidemic in the Caribbean islands. And so we wanted to recognize it as well as Caribbean American people that live here and that have migrated to the States as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at HIV in the community, Caribbean islands and among Caribbean born people, what's really interesting is the Caribbean is the second largest region outside of Sub-Saharan Africa that
Wow.
has like a high prevalence of HIV. I do, see in the literature that, up to 250,000 people were living with HIV in the Caribbean islands. But specifically here in the state of Florida, what we see based on 2018 data is that we have about 19,000 people who are
Wow.
living in the state of Florida that are Caribbean born that are living with HIV. So
Wow.
it's definitely something that's still important. And I feel like, especially with Florida, because we're such a melting pot.
I was just about to say, yeah,
You
literally, it
know,
is a melting pot. Like on any given day, you can meet a Bahamian, a Jamaican, a Haitian, a Trinidadian. Like it is a melting pot here.
it is. It's crazy. So, it's still to me, I feel like very relevant to what we see in Florida. It's very
Mhm.
relevant to still recognize this day and talk about it because even amongst the Caribbean people here in the state of Florida, it's our MSM population that has the highest rates, as well as female heterosexuals when you look at that particular, like, witch populations, and it's very similar to what we see in non-Caribbean born people.
Mhm.
And then if you look at like the highest proportion based on age, this was very similar too to what we see in non-Caribbean people, but definitely 50 and up, which is very surprising. People don't think and realize that our older population is still engaging in sexual activities when they
Yeah.
are. But this is the highest age range that we see amongst this population in the state of Florida. But definitely 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, they're almost at the same rate, between 21 and 23%. That's very, very close.
Those, yeah. And it's interesting that with this with the statistics that's there. It's interesting that you brought that up, Dr. Andrea, because and I know we're going to dive into it. Even when I went to Haiti, when we were working with the AIDS Health Foundation, there was literally, it was so surprising. One of the locals that I tested. And what literally, it was a woman, she was 64 years old, and she tested positive for syphilis. Of course, pharmacist to pharmacist, we identified, we're like, okay, maybe it was latent. She did not, but she had no idea. And but as you said, people in their 50s, it's a normal, it's a natural part of life. They're still sexually active, but also they still need to be tested and they still need to be educated.
Absolutely. And yes, and that's the thing, that this is something that I feel like even in the healthcare setting can be easily missed, because they're not thinking that sexual intercourse is a activity among what they consider elderly people, 65 and up.
Yeah.
But 50 and up, they're not elderly, but we still have to definitely,
Yes.
consider this. That's so important. That was actually one of my questions that I was going to ask you too, as far as with your testing, like being able to test in Haiti and in the Bahamas and in Tallahassee, Florida. Did
Yeah.
you see a difference when you were doing that community outreach in those?
Absolutely. Yes, definitely, for sure. I would say, let me start with home, back in the Bahamas, where so we have different organizations there, maybe like I would say maybe two to three, two the most, that are active in terms of HIV awareness and giving back, and really helping improve the quality of QOL, or the quality of life for persons that are living with HIV and with AIDS. And one of the things I remember, a friend of mine, this was a few years ago, we decided to do a Christmas big give. And so we went to one of the organizations. It's actually called the All Saints AIDS Camp. And what we did, Dr. Andrea, was we pretty much, and that's why social media is so powerful. I know some people, don't care for it, but, outside of it being free marketing, you really can get your initiatives and get what it is that you want off the ground. And so we just put out a mass message, for anyone that, if you were working or wasn't able to be there, you can give monetary donations. But we were able to get a chef on site. We were able to get a barber to come out. We were able to purchase groceries. And we pretty much spent literally the entire Saturday there at this camp. And I was doing hair braiding. We had someone to come out. So it was maybe about 4 or 5 of us that we connected and collaborated together. And we were able to not only help, these individuals that were HIV AIDS positive feel better, but we were also, able, even though the country of the Bahamas, it's so small, there were still a large amount of people that did not even know that this camp existed, or if they knew it existed, they just did not know that there were people living in this camp. And so when we were able to share that on social media, particularly Facebook, it brought light. So, since then we were able to do things like, there were individuals and, other corporations that were able to do things like pay the light bill for the rest of the year, right? The coordinator. So things like that, because any given day, Dr. Andrea, the lights go out. And so you have
Mm,
patients who are either bedridden, they're HIV positive, they haven't, there isn't enough water, or they haven't eaten, or they missed their medications. And of course, for, HIV antiretroviral, or what we know as heart therapy, it's very important that you're compliant. But in the Bahamas, that is a major issue. It's
mm,
still a major issue. Now, transitioning to next door neighbors, because we're really close, Haiti, right? When we went to go and test, the really, it had to be incentivized, because in places like Haiti, it wasn't just so much, okay, we're going to test you, but Dr. Andrea, we literally had to give the locals a reason to get
mm.
tested.
It's like
So
that here,
it, like,
almost.
literally, like,
Mhm.
it was like the only reason why there was such, I think it was like, I think we tested about maybe 12 to 1300. So we were there from Thanksgiving, Thursday, all the way to like Wednesday, I believe it was. The only way that we were able to get people to come and get tested and return from their results, we did things like give them phone cards, or, offer a bag of rice for a household. But it was very much different. And the
Mm,
thing about Haiti with Haitians, it's not only the awareness, but it's such a taboo, to the point, Dr. Andrea, it is disrespectful. And I spoke to my father about this, and this is
mm,
so true. Even to this day, there are Haitian American men and women, but particularly, I don't know if our audience knows this, but it is disrespectful for a Haitian woman to ask a Haitian man to put on a condom before engaging in sexual activity.
Really?
Yes.
And this is why I feel like things like this are so important, because when you have community-based organizations such as us, or different organizations, and we're trying to reach the Black population, Black is just because our color is Black doesn't necessarily mean that we're all the same, because there's
Right.
different cultures within and different nationalities within our Black populations. And so that's one big area that I feel like is very important to understand the cultural differences. So between those different areas, just even, but is it the same in Bahamas as well, or is it just
No,
Haiti? Or
it's not as prevalent in the Bahamas, but in Haiti, it was. I mean, I remember one particular day where we went. It's probably like our second day where
hmm,
when we got there and we had already set up our tents and everything and whatnot. And I remember the 16-year-old, and the reason why I do because he wrote a love letter and pushed, and somehow he got that in my backpack. I don't know how, but there were two. There was a 16-year-old, and there were two 13-year-old girls, Dr. Andrea, who I had tested. And the thing that, and I'm telling a lot, maybe a little bit more than information privy, but I'm still, a 37-year-old virgin. And so I remember engaging the two 13-year-olds. So for me, when they were all in a line, and I remember these two 13-year-old girls, 13-year-old, 13
wow,
year
yeah,
olds. But
yeah,
here's the thing, Dr. Andrea, they were not only pregnant, but they were holding, each of them were holding infants in their hand, and they were also expecting. So all of this was
at
a lot
13.
at 13 years old.
Oh my gosh.
So before we even got to testing, I was just trying to that team member, she was looking at me, she's like, "Are you going to be okay?" I'm like, "Yeah," because she could literally see that I was overwhelmed, not only with empathy, but I even started to grieve because I'm at, thinking, pharmacists, medical experts, psychologically and medically and scientifically, your body isn't even really that formed at 13 to be carrying a child for 9 months, and then you're also expecting. So I had to get my, bring my
It's a
emotions.
lot to process.
That's a lot to process. So I'm just like, I'm thinking this was maybe, a neighbor's child or something. No, this was their children, and they both were expecting. But back to the 16-year-old, Dr. Andrea, the 16-year-old, they all hung out together. They both got pregnant by this 16-year-old that was behind them.
For all of three of them together that they
Yes,
were getting
three of them
tested.
together. So he got two best friends pregnant. And then as we were testing, and I'm, communicating and talking with him, and he saw nothing wrong with this. And then the two young ladies, the two 13-year-olds, they were looking at me as if they saw a ghost, because they were like, they didn't see a ring on my finger. So they were like, "You're not married. You're a pharmacist. Why haven't you had children?" And so, as you brought out earlier, the culture clash. But again, I'm like, you guys are 13 years old.
Yeah, we're considered, I think, in our generation, like y'all are like way behind. Like we're late bloomers. You know what I
We
mean?
are. We
Yeah,
are, Dr. Andrea.
yeah.
We are. So, back to your question about, it was definitely a culture
Different.
clash. And
Hmm.
yes, still to this day, their family members, of course, my father being Haitian, and my maternal grandmother, she was also from Haiti, and she passed away. But yes, still to this day, if a woman is dating a Haitian man, unless he has been emotionally aware, or he has done things like therapy, or understood the power of self-awareness and things like emotional intelligence, it is still to this day, you are going to encounter a Haitian man who is going to look at his wife or look at his girlfriend, and when she even just like, okay, if we're dating exclusively, if she even brings up condoms, it's almost as if like, what are you trying to tell me? You don't trust me? I don't
Wow.
trust you, to this day. So in Haiti, yes, that is still an issue. Condoms, you cannot find them everywhere because it's not a thing. It's not something that local Haitians or Haitians around the world, typically where you will see a married man or, a married couple, where
Mhm.
they're like, oh yeah, we have sex and we use condoms. Who has that in Haiti? What are you talking about?
Wow. What did your father say to you when you asked him these questions? Like, I'm so curious to see what was his response as a Haitian man, and you're a woman and you're asking
Yes.
these questions to him. So what are Haitian women supposed to do? And I'm gonna have to bring this up on my other interview that I have coming up soon,
Uh-huh.
just to see, like, well, because I think this is definitely something that could be a contributing factor to why we're continuing to see the spread,
Yeah.
particularly in the Haitian population, even here in the United States, where condoms are readily available versus being
Yes.
in Haiti or Bahamas, where the condoms may not be readily available.
Right.
So even
My
having
father.
access, they still may not use it because of the cultural belief.
Right. And like I said, Dr. Andrea, it's prevalent. It does happen in the Bahamas. There are Bahamian men who it's not as bad, I would say, in terms of the pressure, right? The peer pressure. Okay, a Bahamian woman, married or whatever, like if that's the conversation, we want to go get tested. But there are still men, there are still Bahamians who feel as though if that were to come up in conversation, we were to go on a date, hey, before we engage in sexual intercourse, before I get with you, if you don't mind, I would like, for you to be tested, or let's go together. There are still some Bahamian men that think that it's disrespectful. As a matter of fact, condoms are not even moving as they were before years ago, Dr. Andrea.
Mm,
And it's sad. And so when my father asked me, or when I was asking him about this, it was not until recent. And in the Black community, my father took years before he married my bonus mom. Like, I'm talking like decades. So when I brought that up, he looked at me like, who are you talking to? What do you mean? Like, I'm like, yeah, daddy. When I came back from Haiti, I'm like, why are Haitian men, why are you guys like this? He was like, how dare you tell me to buy a condom to have sex with my girlfriend? Like, how dare you? And I'm looking at my father like, oh my God. This is
mm.
why Haiti is in the condition that it's in terms of sexual education, and why there are 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds who are pregnant, right? Like, this is
Definitely
why
very male dominated.
it is.
And as far
Very
as
much
dictating
so.
the relationship and things that go on sexually in the relationship. But I know, because what's really interesting to me is in the Haiti population, women are higher.
Yeah.
And so, with the example that you just gave, having one male partner with multiple female partners could
Hmm.
be one of those contributing factors as to why there's more women than it is men. I mean, it's the
Yes.
same as what we see in the United States, is that all these women and men have so much to choose from, right?
Right. Right.
So it's just, when you look deeper into these cultures and different, there's not a lot of statistics that's specific to Bahamas, or
Right.
like specific. It's kind of like just grouped and gathered.
Yeah, it is all
Um,
kind of grouped together. The last statistics, honestly, what from according to the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the last statistics that I saw in 2018 is that HIV, the new cases, positive cases, has declined. But you brought up something that really even just reminded me of another case while we were there. And as we, talk about marital, married couples, I remember an older gentleman. He probably was maybe 65, 66, and he had tested positive. But before he left, myself and my partner, we were trying to get him to, make him aware. So we did share his status with him. And so what we did was we wanted him to come back with his wife, because he did tell us, that he was married. And so we, asked, well, are you going to bring your wife because you're positive? I kid you not, Dr. Andrea. Again, Haiti is, the issues are just insurmountable when it comes to socioeconomic, and even just emotional. But I remember literally, and this is what drained me. He was my last case for the day that we had tested. This man literally said, right, and I also speak Haitian Creole. He literally said to my partner and I in the clinic, in the room, He said to us when we asked him if he can bring his wife, if we can make an appointment, do we have to arrange, to go and get her? He said, for what? He said, what she doesn't know isn't going to kill her. What does she need to know? She's not leaving me. She's not going to get married to anybody else. She has my children. And if she's positive, too bad, too sad. Give me my bag of rice. Give me the phone cards that you guys promised me and let me go about my way. But I don't know what you guys are trying to do, wanting my wife to come here. If she's positive, oh, well.
Wow. Wow.
I was done that day. I was reduced to tears.
Yeah, the work, and I will admit, testing, you're exposed to a whole lot that you may not necessarily be, completely ready for
Yeah.
responses like that, and still being able to keep it together, keep a straight face, be non-judgmental in
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, because this is a challenge, because we are aware and we know of a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
I can give you an example of a patient that I remember having similar situation, weren't married, teenagers though,
Mm,
teenagers. And the young woman was pregnant, but her child's father didn't know
that she
he
was
was
positive.
positive and pregnant with their child. So there's definitely situations, I feel like, as a healthcare provider,
Mhm.
because when you're asking permission to share health information or talk, this was actually, in a hospital setting. So just,
Okay.
traveling all these different places, working, taking different contracts, even here in the United States, I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, oh my gosh. And so there's like a part of us that we all learn about ethics and,
Yeah.
is this appropriate? Is this right? Is this care? Because you think about the other person who's
Yes.
still a patient that you want to
Right.
be loyal to, but they're not your patient. And so
Right.
I feel
Right.
like as healthcare providers, we're really put into like very sticky situations. But with HIPAA, which I don't even know if they have things like that in the Caribbean islands or outside of the United States. So, but
They do
here,
in they do in the Bahamas, but in Haiti, um, you could literally, like, the people were just walking in. We were really just grateful that people, that locals were coming to get tested at the sites in Haiti. So it was like, if we knew, and there were clinicians and pharmacists, that are in Haiti and born and raised there, of course, they already knew the cultural challenges that we were going to face coming from Florida or coming from America. So we had already been made privy to information of, listen, we know about HIPAA, but if you guys are trying to get Haitians to sign forms, you better forget about it.
yeah,
Like, just if we can get them tested, give them what we will promise, and get them their results. Hope they come back, then that is a lot. But to
yes,
be able, but things like signing HIPAA forms and things like that, that wasn't even, we were just grateful that we were able to test 12 to 1300 locals at the time. Now in the Bahamas,
wow,
we do exercise HIPAA. Of course, being a small country or whatever in terms of numbers, but of course, the consequences for you and I in Florida releasing information that we have not been given consent to, it's a little bit more lax in the Bahamas, but there are stipulations and there are consequences,
mm,
for being a medical expert and professional that is not practicing confidentiality. It's there, but it's just not as, let's just say you and I working in retail and we were to share information with our loved ones. We know without a shadow of a doubt in the state of Florida,
oh yeah,
not only
it's
will
not
we be
happening.
reprimanded, we're
We
done.
and I wholeheartedly understand the purposes of that too. Just being, when we are patients and not in our role as healthcare providers, the importance of HIPAA, and I know we take our oaths and everything like that, but it is very challenging. It is very challenging to
Yeah,
be on the other side of that, knowing, for example, this woman, this
right.
wife of this man that refuses to tell her. But this is how I think that it's really important too for us to be able to talk about how HIV does affect women in different ways, and even marriage is not going to fully protect you. And
No,
I
it's
think it's
not.
definitely a myth and a misconception that a lot of people have, because you still, one, can have infidelity through marriage, but
Mhm.
at the same time, even other risk factors that you may not be aware of that your partner is participating in. And so one thing that we always do is we really try to let our females know, whoever we're educating out in the community when we do outreach, is to let them know it's not only important for you to know your status, but also
Your
know your
partner.
partner's status, and then to really try to bridge the gap of communication related to sexually transmitted infections with your partner. Can
Right.
you have these conversations, even though they're tough conversations?
Yes.
And really trying to empower women that they can carry condoms, you
Mhm.
can have condom negotiation skills. And so I know from the things that I've seen in the community, it is very hard to get this across to um,
Yeah.
maybe non-American women, or just women of different cultures, and different women, different Black women, or even Hispanic women, because there's even areas in Puerto
Minority.
Rico,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that are still considered Caribbean
Mhm.
islands. And I know our funder, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, they actually have a location in Puerto Rico. I think it's in Carolina, Puerto
Yeah,
Rico.
it is. Yeah, they do. And it's still very much active. Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as like helping increase access to medications, and increasing linkage to care, increasing testing and prevention, options are definitely there, but it is very challenging. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing, that information and being so transparent. If I can get a little bit personal with you telling us though about being a virgin at 37 and living here in the United States as a Black woman, where I
Mhm.
feel like we can be so hypersexualized. How has your experience been, I think, with dating? What would you say to someone who may be in your shoes, even if they are younger? Let's,
Mhm.
take age out of it, but just a
Yeah.
woman who may be either practicing celibacy, or even, remaining abstinent until marriage. Like, how have you been able to overcome some of those challenges, or, maybe temptations with dating and things of that sort? I know a lot of it's probably spiritual, but if you could just share with the audience and just the listeners on that, because I think, just a part of your story, it's definitely what we would say, I think, in our community or in our culture, it's kind of like a unicorn. You're almost
Yeah.
like this special, not that you're not a unicorn, but it's like things that I feel like people don't think is a real thing, and it's
Yeah.
unheard of. I have a few other friends that um, are still virgins as well, and I think
Yeah.
you're such a rare, precious jewel, and I
Thank
think
you.
it's so, so, so important to still show that it can be done, and that it does exist, and it's having that spiritual connection.
Yeah.
um, if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, is, as we talk about womanhood and trying to protect ourselves and things like that, because abstinence is definitely a
Yeah.
form of prevention.
No, absolutely. Definitely. Definitely no problem with that. I know, and I was smiling when you said unicorn, because there's a running joke between my best friend and I. He calls me unicorn. And he's like, man, you
Oh,
just, it's like you real rare. I just need you to know that yes, you great, but he's like, you a real unicorn. And so I was laughing. The first thing I want to say, Dr. Andrea, was, I think for me, and I think, throughout this interview, we were talking about one of the things that is missed or lacking in our communities, whether it's the Black community, but just across cultures, is the communication. I think for me, when I learned that my mother had me at 17 years old, and at the time, again, another taboo conversation, at the time, my father was twice my mother's age.
hmm.
And so when I learned how her life was, she gave up a 4-year scholarship because she was pregnant, and had me at 17. I think I subconsciously, as a teenager, started to say to myself, I don't want that lifestyle. I don't like the fact that, growing up, that my mother, she had to not only give up so much, which is what I know most women and most mothers do, but in all honesty, and I can speak for my mother, even though she's deceased, Dr. Andrea, prior to her death, she did not want that. And she shared this with me, and she was very open and vulnerable. And so for me, outside of it being a spiritual decision, growing up as a Catholic girl back then, outside of it being a spiritual decision and, making this promise to my mother, I made a decision that I not only wanted to wait until marriage, but I also wanted the promise to myself that I deserved a man to wait on me, and I deserve for a man to respect me, because one of the things that we see is that soul ties are so prevalent. And I know this is, it's a little spiritual, but honestly, we have to make sure that when we're getting exclusive with people, whatever relationship that is, that we are getting to know people before we experience orgasms, before we have these sleepovers. And so for me, learning that I not only am valuable, but I am worth the wait, that was really in my commitment to the Lord. That was really what has helped me. Now, I have dated exclusively, but one of my non-negotiables, and one of the things that I ask and shared my coaching clients, is that we work on this list. And so there's a non-negotiable list when it comes to dating, business, whatever it is. And my non-negotiable for me, Dr. Andrea, is we're not having sex. Right. And even if we are tempted, someone has to be spiritually and emotionally strong to recognize that we're not ready for this. And even, from myself and you, like for me, I can say, honestly, even though we're in a world where feminism is very prevalent, I believe that it was God's choice. And there was a reason why children need both parents. In the Superwoman complex, we're not supposed to be raising homes, taking care of
Yes.
bills, taking our sons and daughters to basketball, running a nonprofit, working a 9 to 5. Like, it really takes a village to raise a child.
It
But I
does.
also believe it takes a holistic community to nurture that adult. And so for me, it wasn't just about making a promise to, keep my legs closed, or I don't want to get pregnant, or shun any other woman that has practiced, sex outside of marriage. But it is a decision, and we can practice, abstinence, even if you have, for women and men who has, they have dated or they've indulged in sex before marriage, you can make that decision to wait. And here is one of the greatest benefits that I want to share with the audience, Dr. Andrea, is when we go on make these decisions, there is a soul and emotional detox. Your confidence grows, right? You get to identify who is not for you. If you are dating, or for me, my relationship that did not work out was because those men wanted their way and not my way. So those were one of the reasons. But I really would like to say that it is possible to practice abstinence after sex. It is possible to be disciplined, and it is also possible to find and be with people who are like-minded and respect your non-negotiables. So in
Mhm.
the world of things like the Sierra's prayer and what she had to do, like, it is definitely, all men are not having sex. There are men who are practicing abstinence, but we need to take our time to get to know people, get to know, like, and do things like invest in therapy, wellness coaching, being educated by the Let's Beehive community to really give ourselves what we are worth, and that is healthy men and women, so that we can give birth to healthier men and women as children in the future. We can't
Mhm.
change our generation if we're not changing our decisions.
That's true. Oh my gosh, it's so deep. That's so good, Dr. Lanika. Oh my gosh. No, I mean that's really good, and it is challenging, So, you know, um, because even for me as a single mom,
Mhm.
working, running my nonprofit, it is very stressful. But I think, when people just think about sex is beyond just the act of it, and there's a lot of responsibility that still comes along with that. And
Yeah.
so
One of
it
my
is.
aunts, she said it. And we still say it to this day in the Bahamas. Sex is for grown folks. I shared that recently on our Comcast interview. It is. It's so much deeper than just a few minutes of, an orgasm and whatnot. And of course, adults are watching, but it's so much deeper than that. It's the rejection afterwards. It's what happens when you find out you're pregnant and your partner no longer wants to be connected to you. Like, it's more emotional than it is physical. And so I'm hoping that this interview, that who's ever watching, like, they take the time to go on their self-awareness journey and to begin to break those concepts. Even though my father is Haitian, I know for me, I want a holistic man. I don't want to marry a man that doesn't respect boundaries and understand the power of boundaries, right?
Mhm.
Like my father, as you said earlier, in Haiti, Haitian men, they're very dominant. Women are taught to be submissive and quiet. And it's just now Haitian women are pursuing things like, education and starting their business. But years ago, and still very prevalent in Haiti and the Bahamas, women are now climbing the corporate ladder. But before, that wasn't a thing. And if it was a thing, it was like, well, you're doing too much. Why do you need to
Mhm.
start a business? What do you mean you want me to use condoms? Why are you challenging me about infidelity? And so I
Yeah.
believe as women, we have a lot, not only of power, but we also have the ability to exercise our authority when it comes to romantic and platonic relationships.
No, yeah, this is good. This is good. Well, I know we're getting close to time and we're going to go ahead and try to wrap up. Um, if you could, say for example, and I want to try to speak to that woman, who may be in these situations, or if you had someone who, came to you as a client and they're needing help in this maybe particular area of their life, how with wellness and coaching, and like what advice would you give to a woman or even a teenage girl,
Okay.
you know what can they do to protect themselves, whether that's in your culture, Bahamian Haiti, any different type of culture that's different than what we believe, as far as like traditional medicine versus doing natural holistic products, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like help me to help them understand, I guess, like, what advice would you give someone
Okay. So the
with
first thing that
just
I would
wellness
say,
coaching?
yeah, so the first thing I would say definitely to the HIV positive or AIDS community, you may be diagnosed. Your diagnosis is not your identity. And I want to say that again. Your diagnosis is not your identity. What happened to you is not your identity. Like, you have the ability to change and literally begin to seek God in terms of what and who he called you to be, right? To all the women, whether you're in your 30s, you're a teenager watching this, like, you are more than a conqueror. You are beautiful. You are wise. You are so much more than your breast and your thighs. You're so much more than what has happened to you. You're so much more powerful than the sexual abuse, the rape, the molestation, the physical abuse. Maybe you were hit in a relationship. You are so much more greater than what has happened to you. And the sooner that you recognize that what happened to you is not your identity, you are off to a great start. So that is the first thing that I want to share. The second thing that I want to share, Dr. Andrea, is the importance of seeking help. As I'm working on my second book, Breaking Boxes, which is going to be released this summer, I am talking about, thank you. One of the chapters I'm talking about is the vulnerability and the need sometimes for us to take off this cap, right? To drop these capes of being a superwoman. We feel like we have to do everything. And the moment we reach out for help, it's as if we are perceived as being weak individuals. And if, in light of
That's
COVID
that
and
strong black
that
woman
strong
thing.
black woman, listen, I am on a mission to dismantle the strong black woman or the strong woman agenda. Because again, as pharmacists, we see the rise in mental health, disparities in conditions, why suicide is on the rise, why depression and anxiety is on the rise, again, because we're trying to do so much and we're not being open and vulnerable with our communities. So I would say seek. If you don't have a best friend, or if you don't have friends or colleagues, or maybe your family members, they're not as open, right, to things like different wellness modalities like therapy or coaching, like, don't be afraid to get online. If finances is an issue, look at things like black therapy, therapy for black girls. Look up free resources. Go to your local health department, call the psych, the suicide hotline, but reach, there is help. there is help. You don't have to go through this alone, whether it's a bad breakup, a diagnosis, whatever it is, finding a job, right? Because as you alluded to earlier, Dr. Andrea, womanhood is so complex that it's really just not enough for a mother to raise her children. She needs the support of her family. She needs
Mhm.
the support of community. So that's the second thing that I would say. And then last but not least, the third thing that I would share is don't get tired of working on yourself, right? Like
Mhm.
as Black women, particularly, and I also can share this in the Caribbean. I think for us as women, because our confidence has been broken from either a past trauma or a scenario that has happened, we spend so much investing on aesthetics that we forget that our emotions is where we really need to be focusing on. Now, I'm not saying like I love it. I love getting all dolled up. I love beating the face, getting my hair done. Like all
Yes.
those things are great and they do help increase your confidence. But the real confidence is becoming self aware and working towards the issues that make you feel insecure around another woman, maybe make you feel secure when you're not sexually active or dealing with rejection or being a single mother. So, embracing things like therapy, embracing things like a wellness coach, like start budgeting for those things. Like, let's not begin to invest in therapy and things like that when there's a grief or when someone dies or where, something happens. Let's practice preventative medicine when it comes to our preventative, when it comes to our wellness, and when it comes to professional development. So those are the things that I would say. And of course, to the person that is HIV, AIDS, or positive, zero is possible. I actually know of a person, a woman in my community who was diagnosed with HIV. She contracted HIV from her partner. She's now divorced, but she's undetectable, right?
Mhm.
And that came with a lot, but I definitely want women to know that that you are so much more than what has happened to you. You can practice abstinence, and don't be afraid to reach out to help for help. And if people are making you feel like you are your decisions, then it's time to find a new community. So yeah, definitely that's what I would share. And of course, connecting with Let's Be Hive. And I am believing God that Dr. Andrea, that God would give you the tools and even the ability to mobilize and globalize this initiative and what you're doing here at Let's Be Hive organization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lorneka Joseph. That was so good.
Thank
Oh
you.
my
You're
gosh. And
welcome.
as we close, I would like to give a few words to anyone who may be negative, because we focus on a lot of prevention services too. But definitely getting tested, knowing your status, knowing your partner status, that's the very first step in prevention. And also being aware of certain things, as Dr. Lorneka mentioned, as far as things that could potentially put you at a high risk of transmission of HIV from your partner. Um, so definitely having better perception of what's going on, and knowing those are things that could put you at potentially high risk or make you more vulnerable to transmission of HIV. And then thirdly, I would also like to talk about PrEP, and PEP as a potential preventative tool. So PrEP is our prevention that can happen before exposure. And it's a pill that you can take once a day, or there's also an injectable form that women can use. And then also with PEP, that's after a potential exposure, that if you are highly suspicious that someone is positive, that you can definitely qualify for PEP. But the resources are here. We are here to help you. So we're just going to get ready to close out. Thank you so much, so much, Dr. Joseph, for being here with us today and to shed your light. And definitely, if anyone needs help or resources, I would definitely highly recommend Dr. Lorneka Joseph and Brightly Awake. I
Yeah.
actually think I'm going to hire her for her services because I could definitely use some help with getting my life with business and just prioritizing my health and my wellness and well-being, so I can be a better mother to my son, and
Yes,
just manage everything a lot, because I think even with the pandemic, we all are going through so many different things. And so
absolutely.
adding on these other things that were mentioned today is the wellness piece. we
Mhm.
definitely have to stay on top of that. So thank you again for joining us, and you can
Yes.
definitely reach out to her if you need any of your services. And if anybody is interested in helping Let's Beehive, we are always accepting volunteers.
Yes.
We're looking for business partners, faith partners, so different churches, and also if anyone is interested in donating to the cause, you can definitely go to our website at www.letsbeehive.org. So thank you again, and I look forward to recording. So I'm going to bring up some of those questions with our Haiti talk.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
thank
And I'm
you.
looking forward to watching that as well. So I'm excited about this series. Yes.
Thank you again. Have a good day.
Bye everyone.
Bye.